Breaking news. What really motivated Erdogan to suddenly cut ties with Putin? Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan appears to be cutting ties with Vladimir Putin after months of delicate diplomacy. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, President of Turkey, appears to be ending his relationship with Vladimir Putin after months of delicate balancing. Erdogan has, in the last week alone, signaled his interest in reviving Turkey's efforts to join the European Union and dropped his opposition to Sweden's membership in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Both moves that are sure to anger Putin. Even though Ankara and Moscow had agreed to hold Ukrainian Azovstal fighters captured by Russia until the war was over, he hosted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Istanbul and helped return the men to Ukraine. After Yevgeny Prigozhin and his Wagner mercenaries attempted and failed to overthrow the Kremlin, Putin has been the target of a string of slights over the past week. Despite failing, the uprising shook Putin's hold on power and may have prompted Erdogan to rethink his alliance with Putin and instead prioritize his relationships with the West as one of NATO's largest members. According to Selim Künalp, a former Turkish ambassador to Sweden, Erdogan is likely looking for a way to diversify his allegiances after the failed coup. Despite his efforts to navigate his relationships with both Putin and Western nations during the war in Ukraine, I don't think Erdogan would interpret that as a sign of strength from Putin, Künalp told the Daily Beast. He believes that he has gotten everything possible from Putin. Putin is in less of a position of power than he once was, and as a result, he may not be able to offer substantial support to the Turkish economy and other similar endeavors. He could be looking elsewhere, perhaps. While the Turkish media celebrated last week's diplomatic dance as a major victory for Turkey, the calculations in favor of Sweden joining NATO are probably not so optimistic. It's possible that the decision to pivot to the West is less about achieving tangible and immediate policy results and more about optics and distancing from Putin. Turkey's EU process will not be significantly bolstered by the promise of Swedish support alone, despite Erdogan's efforts to link Turkey's EU bid to his support for Sweden's NATO bid and secure some assurances from Sweden with respect to Turkey's EU bid. Turkey's attempts to join the European Union have failed in recent years. After a failed coup attempt in 2016, Erdogan instituted sweeping constitutional reforms, drawing international criticism of Turkey's human rights and legal record and halting its EU membership bid. Both Germany and France have long regarded Turkey's desire to join the European Union with skepticism. Turkey has been criticized for many things over the years, including its judiciary's lack of independence and President Erdogan's purge of coup plotters. According to Mark Perini, a former EU ambassador to Turkey, Sweden's agreement to push for Turkey's bid to join the EU won't bring Turkey to the finish line. Sweden's backing for the process appears to stop short of going beyond the EU leaders' June 30 agreement, which stated that the EU and Turkey should move forward strategically in their relationship and that the examining of options identified by the European Council for EU-Turkey relations should continue. Charles Michel, President of the European Council, gave a brief update on Turkey's EU membership bid earlier this week, saying that he backs efforts to re-energize our relations and bring them to the forefront. Erdogan's decision to press Sweden on the EU process is likely more of a PR stunt repeating old promises to rally domestic approval than a strategy to get major concessions from Sweden or roadblocks removed from the path to EU membership. Perini told the Daily Beast that the decision was sold to the Turkish audience by the addition of a EU concession at the last minute. As the Swedish foreign minister put it, Sweden is for nothing in this, it is simply a repetition of the June 30 conclusions. According to Sinan Ulcan, a former member of the Turkish permanent delegation to the EU, Sweden's claims that it will support Turkey's bid mean very little. No big deal at all. According to Ulcan, it is purely cosmetic. For those of us who know the dynamics and diplomacy around it, see this very clearly as empty Swedish support to Turkey's new track, an empty promise. Linking Turkey's EU accession process with Sweden's NATO process isn't popular among European officials. Dana Spinant, a spokesperson for the European Commission, said, "You cannot link the two processes. Kuneralp, who was also the head of Turkey's permanent delegation to the EU, said that a similar statement could be made about Sweden, which has long supported Turkey's efforts to join the EU. Kuneralp told the Daily Beast that, "There's nothing very new in there, because Sweden has traditionally supported Turkey's European Union interest. Sweden, of course, is just one of the EU's 27 member states." Given that Turkey does not seem ready to carve out changes that would help it join the EU, Kuneralp argued that Sweden's statements may be beside the point. President Erdogan shows no sign of intending to meet any of the conditions that European Union puts out, Kuneralp said. Other promises Erdogan obtained from Sweden this week may not result in significant changes either. Turkey's objection to Sweden joining NATO was rooted in its belief that the country provided safe haven to militants from the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK. Erdogan was assured by Swedish officials that the country would increase its counter-terrorism cooperation, but the majority of the talks with Sweden occurred months ago. In the past, in response to Turkey's requests for assistance in cracking down on the PKK, Sweden amended its constitution and changed some of its counter-terrorism laws. Still, it's possible that Sweden won't take action that Turkey finds satisfactory. Erdogan warned that it was still unclear whether Sweden's cooperation with Turkey on counter-terrorism would live up to the expectations of Turkey's Nationalist Action Party, MHP, which has placed a strong emphasis on the fight against terrorism. When it comes to counter-terrorism, Erdogan said Sweden would, of course, not do everything Turkey wants. Sweden will act in a way that is consistent with the idea of Europe's norms. Already, the MHP leadership has criticized Erdogan for ignoring their legitimate concerns about Sweden joining NATO in favor of praising the country's counter-terrorism efforts. How will we come together with a country that embraces and tolerates terrorist organizations that directly threaten our national security? Asked MHP leader Devlet Bahçeli. The Kremlin has also retaliated this week against Turkey's moves to the west. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, has warned Turkey not to get its hopes up about joining the European Union. "When I say, no one, I mean the Europeans themselves. Our Turkish allies should not look at this through rose-colored lenses," Peskov warned. Even though it appears that Erdogan has gained nothing more than talking points in Sweden, he has actually succeeded. Erdogan infers that Putin will keep trying to exert pressure on Erdogan, who has gained some ground in his negotiations with Putin over the past few days. Given that Turkey is the only NATO country to have this kind of high-level political dialogue with Russia, the asymmetry has shifted in Erdogan's favor. Turkey is the only member of NATO that does not have sanctions in place against Russia. Erdogan claims that Turkey is the only member of NATO that has maintained an open air corridor to Russia. Erdogan is able to take steps he couldn't take before because Russia's leadership is so concerned with keeping him connected to the West through Turkey. Erdogan's real desire, US-made F-16 fighter jets, appears to be in limbo. On Tuesday, President Joe Biden's national security advisor Jake Sullivan signaled that the transfer of F-16s would proceed, pending congressional approval. For months, President Biden has been clear and unequivocal that he supported the transfer of F-16s to Turkey, Sullivan told reporters. No qualifiers have been added by him. He is planning to go through with the transfer.